Imagine you're a therapist, and your patient is Patrick Bateman. Where do you even begin with somebody like that? Why is he like this? Is it the fact that his parents divorced when he was younger? Is it the stress from his job? Is it all his mother's fault?
Yeah, it's the mother. Always blame the mother.
Hey, Sigmund, remember what I said. If you can't behave yourself, you're going to have to go back to your quiet corner, okay, bud? Thanks. Is it possible to be so wealthy you become a psychopath? Can affluence so thoroughly distort someone's personality that they lose the ability to care about how their actions affect other people? Is affluenza a real thing? Let's talk about it.
Did you know I'm utterly insane?
Great tale.
Hello, and good whatever time of day you're watching this. I'm Willarius the Therapist, and this is the Fictional Character Mental Health Co-op, where we diagnose and treat characters from TV shows, movies, and video games while learning disturbing facts about the human condition. And in this episode, I'm going to be continuing the series that I'm apparently doing, where I'm psychoanalyzing movies where terrible, brutal things happen to characters played by Jared Leto. Today, our patient is Patrick Bateman. Now, before we get too deep into the analysis, we have to deal with the elephant in the chart. That is, our patient, Patrick Bateman, killed anywhere between 20 to 40 people in the course of the film American Psycho. Or maybe he didn't. The end of the film leaves it ambiguous as to whether the string of murders was something that actually happened that he got away with, or was a psychotic break of some kind. Now, for the sake of our analysis today, I'm gonna be largely sidestepping the question about whether the murders actually happened or not. My reasoning is twofold. First, there's already been a lot of analysis done on whether the ending of American Psycho shows that Patrick Bateman experienced psychosis or Patrick Bateman is the world's greatest killer. And so I don't really see the need to rehash that here. Secondly, because we're looking at Patrick Bateman from a psychological perspective, the question of whether or not the murders actually happened is kind of irrelevant. Like, if this were a show about a fictional character prosecuting attorney, then obviously that would be something we'd have to figure out. But as far as understanding the internal mechanics of somebody like this, the important part is whether he actually committed the murders or experienced a psychotic break. This is a person who is constantly fantasizing about violence. And it's a main part of Patrick Bateman's self-concept. We can see from the end of the film that he's actually offended when people don't believe his confessions. So let's take a deeper dive into the personality of the first patient I've ever had to have a business card-induced panic attack.
Something wrong? Patrick? You're sweating.
So let's take a look at his symptoms. By his own admission, he's obsessed with his appearance and how he's perceived by others. He is envious of others, but not so much believes that they are envious of him as much as desperately wants others to be envious of him. He is haughty and disdainful of others, exploits other people, violently, maybe, perhaps, and has a serious lack of empathy. Like, it's quite possible that he doesn't actually care about anyone. And I will stop there. Not because there aren't more symptoms to talk about, there are a lot more, but because experienced treatment team members of the Fictional Character Mental Health Co-op know that we already have enough for a primary diagnosis. You there, in the back.
Narcissistic personality disorder?
We have a diagnosis. If you too would like to be so familiar with mental health diagnostic criteria that you blurt out clinically accurate diagnoses in the middle of watching a movie with no additional context, hit the subscribe button and ring that notification bell. It is immediately apparent, almost 10 minutes into the film, that what we're dealing with in the case of Patrick Bateman is classic narcissistic behavior. All of his interactions are either for his personal gratification or for enhancing his self-image. But you know what? We've been doing this for 4 years now, and I think a lot of you are ready to have a deeper understanding of some of the clinical concepts we've been talking about. Like, I've literally seen people argue in my comment section with scholarly sources. Fantastic. Don't ever change. So I think this community is ready for some additional complexity when it comes to these diagnoses. We have all the criteria to diagnose him with narcissistic personality disorder, which is of course all the insurance company cares about. But if we want to figure out what, if anything, we can do for Patrick, we have to figure out the internal mechanics of his narcissism. It is generally accepted that overall there are two major subtypes of clinically significant narcissistic behavior, with a possible third. This research study actually does a good job summarizing the history of narcissism as a concept. a research study that I will now summarize using chocolates. My apologies to the researchers, I know you worked very hard on this. The first type of narcissism is called grandiose narcissism. It's probably what you imagine when you think of narcissism. Someone has a really big ego, low empathy, and just all around think they're better than everyone. But when you really get to know them, it turns out that they are exactly what you thought they were.
But they are who we thought they were!
The second type of narcissist is called vulnerable narcissism. Vulnerable narcissism looks like it's going to be very similar to grandiose narcissism on the outside. However, after you peel back the layers of apparent grandiosity, there is actually a vulnerable, insecure caramel filling inside. Aww. Many researchers have proposed the existence of a third type of distinct narcissism. Similarly to vulnerable narcissism, it looks like grandiose type narcissism on the outside. But when you get on the inside, you see blood! And by blood I mean cherries, and by cherries I mean antisocial behavior and violence. And that is the TLDR of this very detailed research study. Again, to the researchers, I am very sorry. So this theory helps us put some additional clinical context to Patrick Bateman's situation. He's definitely grandiose, but his grandiosity coexists with a festering antisocial aggression that appears to be the function of anxiety and the fear of losing to someone else. While on the outside, Patrick is able to at least put on the facade of caring about others.
There are a lot more important problems in Sri Lanka. Apartheid, for one, and slow down the nuclear arms race, stop terrorism, and world hunger. We have to provide food and shelter for the homeless, and oppose racial discrimination and promote civil rights, while also promoting equal rights for women. We have to encourage a return to traditional moral values. Most importantly, we have to promote general social concern and less materialism.
But whatever charity or altruism he's seen doing has the same function psychologically as the murders. He's exploiting somebody less powerful in order to enhance his own ego. Additionally, despite his self-report of feeling nothing, people with MPD are known to have a bit of an honesty problem. He struggles with feelings of emptiness and anxiety. What we see from the movie is that the emptiness is a function of him not having an authentic identity other than the carefully tailored image that he makes for himself in order to feel superior to others. And the anxiety is a function of anything that threatens that self-concept. Both of these are features that are clinically typical of narcissism. Even the murders, regardless of whether or not they actually happened, are part of this grandiose self-concept. At the end of the film, Patrick Bateman appears to be cornered by law enforcement and makes a tearful confession to his lawyer about his crimes. Tearful, of course, not because he is remorseful, but because he is about to get caught. But the movie concludes with literally no one believing him, and he's super butthurt about it. This is very special to me. He comes to a situation where it is better for him if people think less of him than is actually true, and still, he can't bring himself to accept someone shortchanging his abilities in any way. He makes it his business to convince his lawyer that, no, I actually am a serial killer. Patrick Bateman is apparently so non-threatening seeming to his colleagues that Luis mistakes his impromptu murder attempt for foreplay.
Baby, I'ma choke you, alright? But you will feel safe the entire time. You will feel totally safe.
So again, more talented film theorists than myself have done a lot of good work assessing whether the string of murders that we see in American Psycho is a reality or something that Patrick Bateman hallucinated. According to the novel American Psycho, Patrick Bateman has a family history of psychosis on his mother's side. So if I had to pick one, I would probably go with the he hallucinated the whole thing answer. But what's important from a clinical side is we have a person with a grandiose sense of self, non-existent empathy, exploits others, and is envious of others or believes that others are envious of him, and is stewing with interpersonal aggression. We have narcissism of the malignant type. So that's all well and good. We've established Patrick Bateman's diagnosis based on the standard measures of our day and age in mental health. But the question at top was, is Patrick Bateman suffering from affluenza? Or is affluenza something that can turn someone into a serial killer in real life? Now, the esteemed members of the fictional character mental health co-op are a shrewd, skeptical, somewhat pedantic group of individuals. So, It's very easy to imagine someone hearing affluenza and thinking to themselves, affluenza? Is that even real? That sounds like something someone made up. To which my response would be, your name is something someone made up. Ergo, you're not real. Ergo, your face isn't real. Boom! Pwned your whole life! In all seriousness, affluenza is not something that is in the current or any previous versions of the DSM, nor is it a condition of further study. But as you can probably imagine, all the diagnoses that we currently have were at some point something of an urban legend or anecdotal until they were studied. Probably the most famous example of this would be the history of a widespread and complex condition. Generals and soldiers would notice that the men that were taken away from their homes and loved ones and put into a position where they would be constantly witnessing, experiencing, and perpetrating horrific acts of violence were not okay for some reason. The condition was known then anecdotally as battle fatigue or shell shock, and the way it was cured was by getting slapped in the face by General George Patton specifically. The 40s were a great time to be alive. Then, over the following decades, studies done on people fighting in previous conflicts, most notably longitudinal studies of veterans of the Vietnam War, helped to scientifically codify what is now called post-traumatic stress disorder. So we see, at least previously in the history of the DSM, something that started out as an urban legend eventually became a scientifically accepted idea. And this process was someone noticing that something was a thing, scientists testing to see if this thing really is a thing, and then the thing ending up in textbooks. So with this in mind, let's take a look at the urban legend known as affluenza. Affluenza was a term allegedly coined by a San Francisco man named Fred Whitman, who basically used it as a troll to make fun of the children of wealthy people. In general, his idea is that people who have inherited wealth live in a completely different world of consequences and behaviors, and that this upbringing resulted in some sort of social disease. Now, Fred Whitman, of course, wasn't a mental health professional, he was just some rich dude from San Francisco. And since then, the idea that affluenza was a disease that could affect how people think was largely a joke. Until it very much wasn't. On June 15, 2013, 16-year-old Ethan Couch was driving a truck under the influence of marijuana and alcohol, while under a restricted license. Ethan crashed the truck, and the car accident resulted in the deaths of 4 people. The district attorney of Tarrant County brought charges for negligent manslaughter against Ethan. Ethan was from a wealthy family, and, long story short, Ethan Couch became one of the most famous people to successfully use affluenza as a criminal defense. After being charged with 4 counts of felony vehicular manslaughter, Ethan Couch was sentenced to 10 years of probation because his defense, with the help of psychologist G. Dick Miller, argued that Ethan Couch's affluent upbringing made it so that he literally does not understand the consequences of his actions. Dr. Miller essentially argued that growing up wealthy can result in a clinically significant syndrome, legally akin to the insanity defense. In order to take this seriously as a disorder, we need some kind of mechanism that can explain how growing up affluent can fundamentally affect one's personality. And in order to do that, we're going to have to take a look at theories that conceptualize the development of personality, which means we're going to have to take a look at psychodynamic theories. Which means...
It's Freud o'clock, mother...
Freud, buddy, you gotta go to your corner. I really am sorry for a lot of his behavior. You might be wondering how a group of serious people like mental health professionals can hang around Freud all the time. And the truth is, not often, but sometimes we may need him. But still, I know he's a lot and he can come off a little strong. In his defense, he is very high right now. Actually, we're going to take a look at a theory that gained traction after the golden age of Freudian psychoanalysis. Post-Freudian psychodynamic theorists saw a lot of value in the developmental model that was at the center of his theory, but thought all the stuff about was a little weird, so they decided to take a different look at development. One of these theorists was a psychologist named John Bowlby. He thought, what if, instead of viewing pathology as things going wrong with a person's psychosexual development, we viewed them from the lens of their attachment history? Attachment is the mental and emotional need to bond with others, first with a person's main caregiver and then with peers. According to Bowlby's attachment theory, disturbances in a child's developmental need for attachment can be a crucial part of pathology seen as an adult. To my knowledge, there haven't been any studies into the relationship between attachment history and the construct of affluenza specifically, but If affluenza were a recognized diagnosis, it would be at least highly comorbid with clinical narcissism, if not an outright subtype. Between the lack of empathy, exploitive nature, egocentrism, and grandiosity, the Venn diagram between affluenza and clinical narcissism probably would look more like a circle. And our patient, Patrick Bateman, has been shown to display signs of a very malignant narcissism, which I will remind you from earlier is the grandiosity of grandiose narcissism coupled with antisocial traits of aggression. But what we also see is that pretty much everyone else in his social circle shows some degree of narcissistic personality traits. His friends are self-obsessed and primarily view relationships from the perspective of personal gain. They demonstrate very little compassion or empathy for others. In fact, aside from the antisocial and specifically violent behavior, there really isn't that much difference between Patrick and his comrades. Something that no doubt bothers someone as ego-driven as Patrick Bateman is shown to be in the film. What could possibly account for everyone in a social class seemingly having the same pathology? Attachment theory has an idea. Research looking at the relationship between attachment history in early childhood and resulting narcissistic personality types have found a correlation between grandiose type narcissism and an attachment pathology called avoidant attachment. Basically what this means is that a caregiver provides basic material needs for the child, but aside from that, essentially ignores them. And what this does is commodify the child's relationship to their primary caregiver. At the center of one of the most fundamental relationships in a young person's life is stuff, and not much more than that. The relationship with the caregiver is largely a materialistic transaction. The child's emotional needs for self-approval and warmth aren't being met by the environment, and so he learns to meet them himself, creating the egocentric temperament that we see in grandiose type narcissism. And wealth can accelerate this. A lot of work has been done about how people in more working class positions can feel alienated from what they're doing. They feel alienated from the value that their labor produces. But at the high end of the socioeconomic spectrum, there is a different kind of alienation that can often occur, and alienation from everyone else. Because American Psycho is told from the perspective of Patrick Bateman, we get a lot of insight into his mindset. And as well as showing the previously mentioned narcissistic traits, he seems to be showing mild symptoms of depression, derealization, or not feeling like he's real or that his actions matter. He's showing difficulty taking pleasure in his life, or in anything other than aggression. Because in the very image-conscious and competitive social circles that you often see at the higher end of the socioeconomic spectrum, it's very easy to see how a child in this environment can come to see himself as merely a prop in someone else's image management, which makes empathizing with others very difficult, if not impossible, but can also create a sense of resentment at humanity that may turn into a drive for revenge. The children of prominent people in these social circles are often seen as an extension of the prominent person. It could be easy to see how that child could be accustomed to being shielded from consequences. Getting suspended, getting suboptimal grades, getting in trouble with law enforcement would reflect badly on the rich child's parent, but these parents would have the means to make those problems go away. The specific combination of avoidant attachment, not receiving consequences or affection from primary caregivers, and having a sense of resentment and alienation from his fellow people would make it hard for Patrick to empathize with others, but easy to hurt them. So we can see how this anecdotal concept of affluenza could really create a potentially deadly combination of pathologies. But an important clinical distinction here is that this is not the result of having money specifically. This is the result of reducing one's self-image and self-worth into a commodity that can be won or lost. Only someone that has conceded to the narrative of his social circle that his personal value is in a zero-sum game where success or failure depends on achievement or embarrassment. Only that kind of person can feel threatened by a business card. But of course, this isn't an inevitable function of money. It's a function of the mistaken idea that providing money is primarily what being a provider is about. Don't get me wrong, children need stuff, but they also need connection and the knowledge that they matter to the people who are important to them. It's also not an inevitable consequence of wealth that the children growing up in these circles live in a world that's completely devoid of responsibility and consequences. Another way to be a good emotional provider is by providing children with opportunities to grow in their own self-efficacy and learn from their mistakes. One prominent wealthy person who took this stance very publicly is Shaquille O'Neal, who said this exact statement to his children.
We ain't rich. I'm rich.
The violent, self-obsessed, too rich to care attitude of Patrick Bateman is not an inevitable consequence of having means. It's the result of turning means into an end, of putting your self-esteem for sale on the social marketplace and living and dying by how it's valued by strangers. The solution? Establish real, emotionally vulnerable connections. Make space for yourself to be a human. Be willing to take risks and learn from mistakes. And this is crucial, be more like Shaq. Based on the information in this video, do you think Affluenza should be a specific subtype of NPD? Let us know in the comments. If you're a fan of movies where characters played by Jared Leto get hit in the face, click here to learn how a toxic work environment can eat away at your wellness and how to stop it. Thanks for spending time with us today. Stay curious, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.